the small town of Willow Creek, the full moon was always a source of fear. It was said that on nights when the moon was full, strange things would happen, and people would go missing. One night, a young couple decided to go for a walk in the woods near the town. As they walked, they noticed that the moon was full and bright, casting an eerie glow over the trees. Suddenly, the couple heard a howl in the distance, a howl unlike any they had ever heard before. It was a howl that chilled them to the bone, and they started to run back to town. But the howling continued, getting louder and closer. The couple was soon surrounded by a pack of wolves, their eyes glowing with a supernatural light. The couple realized too late that the wolves were not normal, but were controlled by the full moon, which seemed to have a life of its own. The couple never returned from that walk, and the townspeople whispered that they had been taken by the moon. To this day, the people of Willow Creek still fear the full moon and the strange things it brings. There was a small town that was plagued by a series of strange disappearances. People would vanish without a trace, and no one knew what was happening to them. The town was so desperate for answers that they hired a famous private investigator to solve the case. The investigator soon discovered that all of the missing people had one thing in common: they had all recently called a plumber to fix a leak in their homes. The investigator decided to pose as a homeowner in need of a plumber, and arranged for the same plumber to come to his home. When the plumber arrived, the investigator was shocked to find that he was an elderly man with a sinister-looking grin. As the plumber worked on the fake leak, the investigator noticed that he was muttering strange incantations under his breath. Suddenly, the floor beneath the investigator gave way and he fell into a dark, damp basement. The plumber appeared at the top of the stairs, cackling maniacally, and the investigator realized that he was a practitioner of dark magic. The plumber used his magic to trap the investigator in the basement, and the investigator was never seen or heard from again. The townspeople soon realized that the plumber was behind the disappearances, and they banded together to capture him. But when they finally caught the plumber, they found that he was no longer an elderly man, but a grotesque, supernatural creature that defied explanation. They destroyed the creature, but the town was never quite the same after that. People whispered that the plumber's ghost still haunted the town, and that those who entered his basement never returned. There was once a family who lived in a large, old house in the countryside. The house was said to be haunted, but the family didn't believe in ghosts and thought it was just a silly rumor. One night, as the family was getting ready for bed, they heard strange noises coming from the attic. They ignored it at first, but the noises persisted, growing louder and more disturbing. Finally, they decided to investigate. As they climbed the stairs to the attic, they felt a growing sense of unease. When they finally reached the top of the stairs, they were greeted by a scene from their worst nightmares. The attic was filled with ghostly figures, their eyes glowing in the dark. The family was paralyzed with fear, unable to move or speak. And then, the ghosts began to approach them, their hands outstretched. The family screamed and ran back down the stairs, but the ghosts were right behind them. They were trapped, with no escape from the ghostly horde that was pursuing them. As the family cowered in fear, they suddenly heard a voice from the shadows. It was the ghost of a previous owner of the house, who had been trapped in the attic for years. The ghost told them that they could break the curse by finding a hidden key that would unlock the door to the outside world. The family searched the house frantically, but they couldn't find the key. And so, they remained trapped in the haunted house forever, forced to live out their days in terror. There was a mysterious antique shop in the heart of the city that sold all kinds of strange and unusual items. One of its most popular items was an old, ornate mirror that was said to hold a dark secret. People who looked into the mirror claimed to see strange and frightening things, and some even claimed that it had taken them to another dimension. The shopkeeper warned that those who entered the other dimension through the mirror would never be able to return, unless they knew the secret way back. Despite the warnings, many people were still drawn to the mirror, and some even claimed to have entered the other dimension and returned safely. So a group of friends, curious and adventurous, decided to test their luck and look into the mirror. As they gazed into the glass, they saw a strange and frightening world that was like nothing they had ever seen before. The sky was a sickly green color, the trees were twisted and black, and the creatures that roamed the land were unlike anything they had ever seen. The friends quickly realized that they were in trouble, and that they needed to find a way back to their own world. But no matter how hard they searched, they couldn't find a way out. They were trapped in this strange and frightening world, with no hope of escape. Just as they were about to give up hope, they stumbled upon an old, mysterious tome that held the secret of how to return to their own world. The tome told them that the only way back was to recite a secret incantation in front of the mirror, and to believe with all their hearts that they could return. The friends hesitated at first, but with no other options left, they recited the incantation and closed their eyes tightly. When they opened their eyes, they were back in the antique shop, in front of the mirror. They were relieved and grateful to be back, but they were also filled with a deep sense of unease. They knew that the other dimension was still out there, waiting for its next victim. From that day on, the friends warned others not to look into the mirror, no matter how tempted they were. But every now and then, someone would still be drawn to the dark secret that lay within the glass, and they would disappear into the other dimension, never to return. The mirror still hangs in the antique shop to this day, a chilling reminder of the dangers that lurk just beyond the veil of reality. There was once a small, quiet town where everyone knew each other and crime was almost non-existent. But that all changed when a wealthy businessman was found dead in his home. The police declared it a suicide, but some of the townspeople had their doubts. The businessman had been a well-liked and respected member of the community, and many found it hard to believe that he would take his own life. So a group of concerned citizens decided to investigate the case on their own. As they dug deeper, they uncovered a web of lies and deceit. They discovered that the businessman had a secret, dark side that he kept hidden from the world. He was involved in illegal activities and had made many enemies. The citizens were convinced that the businessman had been murdered, but the police wouldn't listen. They were certain that it was a suicide, and they weren't interested in reopening the case. So the citizens took matters into their own hands. They gathered evidence, interviewed witnesses, and pieced together the events of that fateful night. And finally, they found the murderer, the businessman's business partner, who had motive, means, and opportunity to kill him. But when they took their findings to the police, they were met with disbelief. The police still believed that it was a suicide, and they refused to arrest the murderer. So the citizens took the murderer to court, and after a long and grueling trial, they finally won. The murderer was found guilty and sent to prison, and the truth about the businessman's death was finally revealed. There was a small, secluded cabin deep in the woods that was said to be haunted by the ghost of a woman who had died there many years before. Despite the rumors, a group of friends decided to spend a weekend at the cabin to see if they could find any evidence of the ghost. The first night at the cabin was uneventful, but as the night went on, strange things started to happen. Doors would slam shut on their own, strange noises echoed through the cabin, and the friends started to feel like they were being watched. One of the friends, a paranormal investigator, was determined to capture evidence of the ghost and set up a series of cameras and other recording devices throughout the cabin. But when they reviewed the footage the next day, they found nothing out of the ordinary. Frustrated and scared, the friends decided to leave the cabin and head back to the city. But as they were packing their things, they discovered that one of their friends was missing. Despite a thorough search of the cabin and surrounding woods, they couldn't find any sign of their missing friend. Days turned into weeks, and the friends never heard from their missing friend again. The police investigated, but they could find no evidence of foul play and the case went cold. Years later, one of the friends stumbled upon a box in an attic that contained all of the recordings and footage from their weekend at the cabin. As they watched the footage, they noticed something strange. In one of the recordings, they could see the ghost of the woman who was set to haunt the cabin. But even more shocking, the ghost was holding the hand of their missing friend, leading them away from the cabin and into the woods. The friend was horrified and realized a shocking truth. Their missing friend was not a victim, but had actually been the ghost all along. The ghost of the woman had found someone to keep her company in death, and had led them away from the cabin to keep them there forever. Samantha was home alone, enjoying a relaxing shower after a long day at work. She closed her eyes and let the warm water wash away the stress of the day. But suddenly, she heard a loud noise coming from her front door. Panicked, Samantha quickly turned off the shower and reached for a towel to wrap around herself. She cautiously made her way to the front door, but found that the intruder had already broken in. She could hear footsteps coming towards her, and she knew she was in grave danger. Samantha ran to her bedroom, locking the door behind her and grabbing her phone to call for help. She dialed her boyfriend's number, but he didn't answer. She tried calling 911, but the line was busy. She was trapped, with no one to turn to for help. Just as the intruder was about to break down her bedroom door, Samantha heard a loud noise coming from outside. It was her boyfriend, back from his trip and coming to her rescue. He had received her panicked voicemail and rushed home as quickly as he could. With a sense of relief, Samantha watched as her boyfriend kicked down the front door and overpowered the intruder. He saved her from a terrible fate, and held her tightly as she cried tears of gratitude and relief. From that moment on, Samantha knew that she would always be safe with her boyfriend by her side. And she vowed to never take a shower alone again, because you never know what might happen when you're home alone. John was a successful businessman, but he was haunted by a dark secret. An ancestral demon had been following him for as long as he could remember, tormenting him with nightmares and strange occurrences. He had tried everything to break the curse, but nothing seemed to work. One night, John had a particularly vivid nightmare where the demon appeared to him and revealed the source of the curse. It had been passed down from generation to generation, and could only be broken by a ritual that involved a specific artifact and a sacrifice. John was desperate to break the curse, so he set out on a journey to find the artifact. He traveled to remote villages and consulted with ancient scholars, piecing together the information he needed to complete the ritual. Finally, he found the artifact and made his way to a secluded location to perform the ritual. He made the necessary preparations and, with a heavy heart, made the sacrifice. To his shock, the demon appeared before him and, with a wicked grin, said, "You have broken the curse, but at what cost?" John realized too late that the sacrifice he had made was not an offering to the demon, but a part of himself. The demon disappeared, and John was left alone with the full weight of his actions. He felt a deep sense of regret, but also a sense of release. The curse had been broken, but at what cost? John vowed to never let anything like this happen again. He dedicated his life to studying the occult, determined to understand and protect himself from the forces of darkness. He never forgot the lesson he learned that day, that there is always a cost to breaking a curse, and sometimes the price is too high to pay. Samantha was on a hike in the woods with her friends when she came across an old, abandoned cabin. Being the adventurous type, she decided to explore the inside. As soon as she stepped inside, she was hit by a feeling of dread. The air was thick and heavy, and the world seemed to close in around her. Despite her friends' protests, she pressed on, drawn to the mysterious energy of the place. As she made her way deeper into the cabin, she found a room filled with strange markings and symbols. In the center of the room was a large, ornate mirror. Samantha couldn't resist the urge to look into the mirror, and as she gazed into it, she felt herself being pulled into a dark, alternate reality. She found herself in a world filled with terror and darkness, with creatures that seemed to exist only in her nightmares. She wandered aimlessly, trying to find a way back to reality. She came across a figure that looked like a wise old sage, who told her that the only way back was to solve a puzzle hidden within the alternate reality. Samantha worked tirelessly to solve the puzzle, but each time she thought she was close, she was drawn deeper into the alternate reality. She began to lose all hope, convinced that she was stuck there forever. Just when she thought it was all over, she solved the puzzle and was suddenly transported back to the abandoned cabin. She bolted from the place, never daring to look back. Samantha never spoke of her experience to anyone, but she was never the same after that day. She was haunted by the memory of the alternate reality, and the things she saw there. Some nights, she would wake up in a cold sweat, convinced that she was being pulled back into the dark, terrifying world. John had always been a curious and imaginative person, but lately, his thoughts had started to take a dark turn. Everywhere he looked, he saw faces, faces in the walls, faces in the objects around him, faces in the food he ate. At first, he thought it was just his mind playing tricks on him, but as the days went by, the faces became more and more vivid and real. He started to feel like he was being watched, like the faces were following him everywhere he went. He became paranoid and fearful, and he stopped leaving his house. He was afraid that the faces would follow him outside and that they would never leave him alone. John tried to ignore the faces, but they only seemed to become more persistent. He started to see faces in his dreams as well, and they were always the same, twisted and grotesque, filled with a sense of malevolence. One day, John couldn't take it anymore. He took a knife and started to carve the faces out of the walls and objects around him, trying to banish them from his life. But as soon as he had finished carving one face, another would appear in its place. John became more and more disturbed, and he started to question his sanity. He couldn't understand why he was the only one who could see the faces, and why they were tormenting him. It wasn't until after John's death that the truth was finally revealed. The faces were the manifestation of an ancestral curse, passed down from generation to generation. The curse had claimed John as its latest victim, and it would continue to torment others unless it was broken. John's family discovered the ritual that would break the curse, but it required a sacrifice, the sacrifice of a life. And so, they decided to carry out the ritual, hoping to break the curse and bring peace to the tortured soul of John. But even after the ritual was performed, the faces continued to haunt John's family, appearing in their dreams and in their waking moments. They realized that the curse was not easily broken, and that it would continue to torment them for generations to come. In a small town, strange things started to happen. People were disappearing without a trace, and strange lights were seen in the sky at night. The townspeople were scared and didn't know what to do. One night, a group of teenagers decided to investigate the source of the strange lights. They found a crashed spaceship in the woods, and they approached it cautiously. As they got closer, they noticed that there were creatures inside the ship that didn't look like anything they had ever seen before. The creatures were tall, with elongated heads and large, black eyes. They seemed to be examining the ship's controls, as if they were trying to fix it. The teenagers were about to turn and run, but the creatures suddenly turned their attention to the group. The teenagers were paralyzed with fear as the creatures approached them. Suddenly, one of the creatures spoke in a strange, mechanical voice. "We come in peace," it said. "We need your help." The teenagers were shocked. They had never heard of aliens before, and they didn't know what to make of the situation. Despite their fear, they agreed to help the aliens repair their ship. As the days passed, the teenagers became more and more involved with the aliens. They learned that the aliens were from a distant planet and that they had been traveling through space for centuries. They also learned that their planet was in danger, and that they needed the help of the townspeople to save it. However, as the repairs to the alien ship progressed, strange things started to happen. People in the town started to act strangely, as if they were under the control of something else. The teenagers realized that the aliens weren't what they seemed, and that they had a sinister plan in mind. The teenagers tried to warn the townspeople, but they wouldn't listen. The aliens had taken control of their minds, and they were now working to help the aliens take over the planet. The teenagers were the only ones who could stop the aliens, but they were outnumbered and outmatched. As the aliens' plan reached its final stages, the teenagers realized that there was only one way to stop them. They sacrificed themselves to destroy the alien ship, putting an end to the alien threat once and for all. The town was saved, but at a great cost. The teenagers were hailed as heroes, but their sacrifice was never forgotten. To this day, their story is told as a cautionary tale of the dangers of the unknown. There was a family who lived in a remote cabin in the woods. The father, mother, and their 2 children lived a simple life, far away from the stresses of modern society. However, one day, their peaceful existence was shattered when they stumbled upon a mysterious stranger in the woods. The stranger was unlike anyone they had ever seen before. He was tall, with pale skin and piercing eyes. He claimed to be lost, and he begged the family for their help. The family was hesitant, but they felt sorry for the stranger and decided to take him in for the night. As the night progressed, the stranger began to act strange. He would mutter to himself and pace back and forth in his room. The family grew more and more uneasy, and they decided to ask the stranger to leave in the morning. However, when they went to the stranger's room, they found that he had disappeared. They searched the entire cabin, but there was no sign of him. The family was stunned and scared, but they assumed that the stranger had simply snuck out in the middle of the night. Days passed, and the family tried to put the strange encounter behind them. But they soon realized that they were being watched. They would see the stranger's piercing eyes in the shadows, and they would hear strange whispers in the night. The family was scared, but they didn't know what to do. One night, the family was awakened by a loud crash. They rushed to the stranger's room, and there they found him, lying on the floor. He was badly injured and was barely alive. The family tried to help him, but it was too late. The stranger took his last breath, and the family was left with a sense of foreboding. The next day, the family went to the authorities and reported the stranger's death. The authorities investigated, but they couldn't find any evidence of foul play. The family was left with more questions than answers. However, as they were going through the stranger's belongings, they found a journal that he had been keeping. As they read the journal, they realized that the stranger was not a stranger at all. He was a creature from another dimension, who had been sent to their world on a mission. The creature had been trying to warn the family about a looming threat that was coming for their world. The family was shocked and horrified. They had been living with another worldly being, and they had never even suspected it. The creature's journal spoke of a great evil that was coming, and it warned that the family would be instrumental in stopping it. The family was left with a heavy burden, but they knew what they had to do. They banded together and fought against the evil that was threatening their world. They were successful in defeating the evil, but they were changed forever by the experience. They would never be the same again, and they would always remember the stranger who had changed their lives forever. There was a small town that was known for its peacefulness and tranquility. People came from all over to escape the chaos of the city and to enjoy the simple life that the town offered. However, one day, the town was thrown into chaos when a series of strange events began to occur. It started with small things, objects moving on their own, strange noises in the night, and an overall feeling of unease. But as the days passed, the strange events escalated, and people started to vanish without a trace. The town was in a state of panic, and no one knew what to do. The local police department did their best to investigate, but they couldn't find any clues. The disappearances seemed to be the work of a supernatural force, and the police were at a loss. However, one of the detectives on the case was determined to get to the bottom of it. Detective Johnson was known for his tenacity and his unyielding spirit, and he was determined to find the truth. He spent every waking moment working on the case, and he finally uncovered a clue that led him to a strange old mansion on the outskirts of town. As Detective Johnson approached the mansion, he felt a sense of unease. The place seemed to be abandoned, and there was an aura of evil that surrounded it. But Detective Johnson was fearless, and he entered the mansion to see what he could find. As he entered the mansion, he was met with a shock. The mansion was filled with strange, otherworldly creatures, and they were all gathered in one room. Detective Johnson was frozen with fear, but he knew that he had to act quickly. He reached for his gun, but it was too late. The creatures had already seen him, and they were closing in. Just as the creatures were about to attack Detective Johnson, he was suddenly transported to another dimension. He found himself in a strange world, filled with creatures that he had never seen before. He was confused and disoriented, and he had no idea how he had gotten there. But then, he saw something that made his blood run cold. The creatures in this dimension were all wearing the same symbol that was found at the scene of the disappearances in the small town. Detective Johnson realized that he was in the midst of a supernatural force that had been terrorizing the town. However, as he was about to turn and run, he was suddenly approached by a figure who identified himself as the ruler of this dimension. The figure told Detective Johnson that he had been brought to this dimension because he was the only one who could stop the evil that was threatening to spill over into his world. Detective Johnson was shocked, but he knew that he had to act. He banded together with the creatures of this dimension, and they fought against the evil that was threatening both of their worlds. In the end, they were successful in defeating the evil, and Detective Johnson was returned to his world. However, Detective Johnson was never the same again. He was forever changed by the experience, and he was haunted by the memories of the strange world that he had visited. He would always remember the shocking twist that had changed his life forever. Retired cop Jack had seen it all in his days on the force. He had faced dangerous criminals, responded to terrible accidents, and witnessed the worst that humanity had to offer. But he never expected to find himself in a situation like this. One day, Jack was walking in the park when he heard a faint crying coming from a nearby abandoned building. He immediately knew that something was wrong, and he went to investigate. As he approached the building, he saw a small hand reaching out from a broken window in the basement. Jack knew that he had to act quickly, and he called the police. When they arrived, they found that the girl had been trapped in the basement for a week without food or water. She was dehydrated and weak, but she was still alive. The police were able to get her out of the basement and take her to the hospital. However, the girl was too traumatized to speak about what had happened, and the police were unable to get any information from her. Jack felt a strong connection to the girl, and he knew that he had to help her in any way that he could. He spent the next few days by her side, offering her comfort and support. Slowly but surely, she started to open up to him. She told him about the man who had kidnapped her and kept her in the basement, and she revealed that she had been living in fear every day since. Jack knew that he had to do something. He couldn't let the man who had done this to the girl get away with it. So, he set out to find him. He used his skills and experience as a retired cop to track the man down, and he finally found him hiding in a nearby motel. Without hesitation, Jack confronted the man and arrested him. He brought him back to the police station, where he was charged with kidnapping and held without bail. The girl was finally able to get the justice that she deserved, and Jack was hailed as a hero. However, Jack's nightmares didn't end there. He was haunted by the memory of the girl trapped in the basement, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he had missed something. He started to investigate the case on his own, and what he uncovered was more shocking than anything he had ever encountered in his years as a cop. The man who had kidnapped the girl was not acting alone. He was part of a larger network of kidnappers who were using abandoned buildings to hold their victims captive. Jack was horrified by what he had found, and he knew that he had to act quickly. He worked with the police to track down the rest of the kidnappers and put an end to their operation. It was a grueling and dangerous task, but Jack was determined to see it through. In the end, he was able to save countless other girls who had been trapped just like the one he had rescued. But even though he was able to bring the kidnappers to justice, Jack was never the same again. The memory of the girl trapped in the basement would stay with him for the rest of his life, and he would always be grateful for the chance to help her and others like her. It was just another routine call for Detective Samantha. She had been a police officer for many years, and she had seen it all. But when she arrived at the old abandoned mansion on the outskirts of town, she knew that this was not going to be a typical case. As she entered the mansion, she was immediately struck by the feeling of dread that permeated the air. The windows were boarded up, the walls were covered in cobwebs, and there was a thick layer of dust on the floor. She cautiously made her way through the halls, a flashlight beam illuminating the way. As she turned a corner, she heard a faint voice coming from one of the rooms. She approached slowly, her hand on her gun, and she cautiously pushed open the door. What she saw inside made her heart stop. There, lying on the floor, was a young woman who was badly beaten and bruised. She was barely conscious, and she was muttering unintelligibly. Samantha immediately called for backup, and the woman was taken to the hospital. As she waited for the woman to regain consciousness, Samantha started to investigate the case. She soon discovered that the woman had been missing for several weeks, and that there had been reports of strange noises and activities coming from the abandoned mansion. Samantha was determined to find out what had happened to the woman, and she began to dig deeper. She talked to the neighbors, she examined the evidence, and she pieced together a horrifying story. The mansion had once belonged to a wealthy family, but it had been abandoned for many years. It was said to be haunted, and many people avoided it like the plague. However, a group of teenagers had stumbled upon it one day, and they had decided to explore the inside. What they found was a nightmare beyond their worst fears. The mansion was home to a cult that had been conducting brutal and inhumane experiments on the young women they had kidnapped. The cult had been operating for years, and they had taken many young women who had never been seen again. Samantha was horrified by what she had uncovered, and she knew that she had to put a stop to the cult's reign of terror. She worked tirelessly, gathering evidence and tracking down the members of the cult. She finally confronted them in a dramatic showdown, and she was able to put an end to their evil once and for all. The young woman was finally able to go home, and she was reunited with her family. Samantha was hailed as a hero, and she was praised for her bravery and determination. But even though the case was closed, she would never be able to forget the horrors that she had uncovered in the abandoned mansion. The memory of the young woman lying on the floor, battered and broken, would stay with her forever.